Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Grimflayer. I hope you are all doing very well today. I am back with more Golgari gameplay for you, and we are on the draw. We've got a hand that's a little... there's a lot to analyze here. We only have 2 lands. That's the first thing to note, and a couple of 3 drops, and as well as our 6 drop, which of course in practice is more of a 2 or 3 drop, but not in the first couple turns. So we've got kind of a high mana curve. We've also got a 2 drop that wants to be a mana sink. So we need more mana than we have, that is for sure. One of our lands also enters tapped, so there's a little bit of tension between deciding whether to turn 1 Thoughtseize or not, because if we don't play this on turn 1, we might not be able to curve out efficiently, even if we draw another land. So the final thing to note is this hand is a little bit painful. We might have to fetch shock Thoughtseize at some point. We're taking 5 life now. That's not that unheard of in GBX decks in general. But one really overlooked aspect of straight-up BG Rock, straight-up Golgari, is just how painless the land base really is. And we don't have that luxury yet here. We might draw more lands. That's another reason they would be good, as we could sequence less painfully. But still, this hand, it's got a lot of little downsides to it. That said, it does offer us hand disruption. It does offer us a threat. It does offer us both in the form of Lily, and it does offer us the top end of Tassiger. So I think it's a keep. I kind of don't mind being on the draw with this because it lets us get another look before we start sequencing. So yeah, it's a little borderline, but I think overall we are going to keep it. Opponent will keep 7 as well. Urza's Mine pass. Okay, some kind of Tron deck. For that reason, I kind of feel obligated to Thoughtseize here. If we're thinking the most likely suspect is just straight up green Tron, they could go Tower, or excuse me, no, there are some things they could care about. They didn't play a map on one, which is the big thing, but they could still go Forest Sylvan Scrying, I guess, is the major reason that we want to discard them now. On the bright side, our life total does not matter that much in this matchup, so we can fetch and shock aggressively. Only to find that it is indeed mono blue Tron instead of the more commonly suspected green Tron. Now, they have... they're still a little bit a ways away from Tron. They only have one of the Tron pieces, a redundant one. They have a couple blue sources, and they have the Academy Ruins. That's an interesting one to make note of. Thirst for Knowledge and Sundering Titan. So our opponent has a pretty medium hand here. I think we pretty clearly just take away the Thirst for Knowledge here, especially because we can hit Titan with our future Thoughtseize. They will play out Naboro and pass. Now, this Blue Tron deck, I have seen them play Remand before. I don't think that's particularly common. I think they lean more on cards like Condescend, but regardless, any of the blue counter spells that only cost 1 blue mana, plus 1+ colorless, those are all on the radar. They're all at least moderately playable here, so we need to be aware of those. We did make our 3rd land drop, unfortunately. It's another tapped one, but we're still happy to see it. We'll lead off on the Thoughtseize. And, Solemn Simulacrum. This is an interesting value card, right? It's actually pretty good against us. They get to ramp, they get to leave a body behind, and then when the body dies, they get to draw a card. Interesting card. I think that's a little bit more worrisome at the moment than the Sundering Titan, so we'll go ahead and take that. And we know what they have left. It's not much for the moment, so we'll go ahead and make our land drop and pass it on back. They'll play the Academy Ruins and pass. So, worth noting that Academy Ruins is live to get this Solemn Simulacrum back. I still think it was the right take. It kind of forces them to use their mana for that if they want it back. Of course, they could always get the Sundering Titan back just the same if they were so inclined, so that doesn't change much. We can also potentially fight over it with Scavenging Ooze. That said, Blooming Marsh was a great draw, because now we just get to play out a Liliana, and that is just fantastic if it resolves, which it does. Very, very, very good at this stage in this matchup. We will pitch our redundant copy of Lily, and they will pitch their redundant copy of Urza's Mine. Fair enough. Let's see if they have any effects on the end step here. Yep, they're going to go get the Simulacrum. I think that's a good play from them. So as we knew, they have the 4th land. And yep, they can make their value play here. Fair enough. Alright, we're continuing to draw lands. So let's start out with the discard mode, kind of giving them as little information as possible to work with. Before we do anything else, we'll make them decide. So they'll finally get rid of that Sundering Titan. Alright. We pitched our Hissing Quagmire because it's redundant and because we're actually going to be able to use our mana really efficiently this turn if we play Field of Ruin instead. Obviously, Field of Ruin is also fantastic for keeping them off of Tron if they start showing signs of getting close. It can also pop this Academy Ruins if that becomes a thorn in our side. So Field was a fantastic draw here. We get to go ahead and lead on the Ooze, and then we get to play our Tasigur. Now, we could have left a card in the yard. Why didn't we? Well, we don't actually really want any of those, so if we're at a stage of the game where we start activating the Tasigur, none of those are fantastic. I think the worst they're going to be able to do to our Liliana is probably bounce her, not destroy her, so we're not interested in using Tasigur to dig back a second copy of Liliana. Thoughtseize is fantastic in the matchup, but we are going to run them out of resources, and they're... even though they're a blue deck, they're not going to hold that many cards in hand. You know, they're not likely to play Drago with the one card they'll be seeing per turn as much as you might think. So for that reason, Thoughtseize is not that appealing anyway. So we're just going to go ahead and delve away all 5. That lets us Blind Mill potentially something we really want with Tasigur, and they won't have any choice but to give it to us. It also lets us leave up a mana for Scavenging Ooze to interact with their graveyard, so that feels really good on both accounts. And they're just going to force action with a Snapcaster Mage, of course. They only have one target, that's the Thirst for Knowledge. They're just kind of hoping we miss the line. We do not. We'll go ahead and respond by eating the Thirst for Knowledge, and they just have a 2-1, basically. 1 unknown in hand. They cannot attack very profitably with a Simulacrum. You know, they could send her in. They could send it in at the Liliana, and we would block. But, you know, that draws them a card. Then they could get it back with the Academy Ruins. That's a potential line, but that might just be kind of spinning their wheels. It really also depends on what they have as that remaining card in hand. Maybe they have some kind of action they would prefer to hold up. It's also, yeah, I mean, they really need to deal with this Liliana, though. That's the big problem for them. So, we draw Thoughtseize. Okay. We cast the Thoughtseize. We could have just ticked the Liliana up. Pretty similar either way. I'm still not very worried about my life total. It's a Mindslaver. Okay. So that's gone. That's a major win condition of the deck. Mindslaver and Academy Ruins is a pretty nice combo. Here I misplayed a little bit. There was no real reason for me to do this on my main phase. No real reason whatsoever for me to do this, but I was just kind of thinking about all of the things I've mentioned, and I just kind of went on autopilot and said, hey, let me get rid of that. But that, of course, lets them activate in response. So I get to still beat them because to the card because I had another green mana, but it was just not mana efficient, and now it puts me shields down to their graveyard, so they can buy back the Sundering Titan, for example. Not something I'm worried about, but still a minor misplay worth pointing out. We'll take the Lily up. And I'm happy to just pass here, even though Tasigur is a nice, we want to be proactive, we want to start the clock when in doubt, but here the most proactive thing to do is protect my Liliana, because if I get to ultimate her, that's going to make it very, very, very tough for them to come back. So the proactive play here is actually to leave my creatures back to block. They will cast a Thirst for Knowledge. Okay, that's a really good one off the top. Draw 3. Potentially only discard 1, but they seem to have blanked. So they will scoop it up, knowing that unless they drew something great there, they cannot beat the Liliana ultimate, while I have a reasonable board otherwise, while I still have Field of Ruin to disrupt them off of Tron. So that was a pretty foregone conclusion there, once they failed to find an answer off of the Thirst for Knowledge. So, interesting little game. Blue Tron is an interesting deck. They play on curve a lot more traditionally, especially in the main deck, than Green Tron does. So while Green Tron might bring in some cards like Thought-Knot Seer or Thragtusk that can be more easily hardcast and play more traditionally along the curve without going 1+1+1=7, that is still more of a sideboard plan for them, whereas that's kind of a main deck plan for Blue Tron. They're playing these value cards like Simulacrum and Snapcaster Mage. These are things to be aware of when we move to the sideboard. It's less of an all-or-nothing deck than Green Tron is. Not only because of that, but because they just simply depend less heavily on assembling Tron and maintaining it. Even perhaps their most iconic and high-powered win condition of Mindslaver, it's not a 7 or an 8, it's just a 6. So they can kind of do the old O-Stone plan of hardcast it and then next turn activate it. It's not ideal, obviously. They want to hit 10 mana on turn 4 if they can and just go to town, but it's worth noting that keeping them off of Tron is even less of a surefire path to win than it is against Green Tron. And as any BGX player knows against Green Tron, just keeping them off Tron is not enough. You need a clock as well. Otherwise, they will hardcast things on the curve the old-fashioned way, and they'll still beat you. So let's take a look at our sideboard and figure out how we can keep Blue Tron from going over the top of us. Alright folks, we are back looking at the sideboard against Utron. Now, this is one of those matchups where it's probably going to be a little less straightforward in terms of what to do compared to regular Tron. When you have these kind of derivatives of known archetypes, they tend to be a little less clear in terms of what's very obviously good and what's very obviously not good. So let's see if we can figure out the optimal sideboard strategy. Engineered Explosives, we'll just start out saying that does almost nothing. Nihil Spellbomb's an interesting one. They have shown us Snapcaster Mage and Academy Ruins, and remember that the Academy Ruin plus Mindslaver lock is a primary win condition, so I'm kind of interested in Spellbomb. That said, Spellbomb could kind of be a blank if they are just doing other Tron things to us. So I'm going to put that in the maybe category for now. Maelstrom Pulse I'm pretty interested in as another answer to any of their big payoff cards, including Mindslaver. Golgari Charm, Enchantments, the Weenie Sweeper mode doesn't matter. Enchantments, not sure how relevant that is. Regen, no, so we'll give that the old no. Fulminator Mage is fantastic. The Stone Rain effect is great. I'm just going to shortcut over here instead of going in order and say we want the Extraction as well. We have Fulminator plus the Assassin's Trophies as fantastic ways to keep them off of Tron for good, combined with Surgical. Now, Surgical, against a Snapcaster deck, it's not worth bringing in alone. That's a trap. It is a mistake to try to outvalue them. And Snapcaster Mage is a value play using Surgical Extraction because you are almost certainly putting yourself down on resources to do so. Even if you take away their Snapcaster target successfully, they still get a 2-1 body out of the deal, and you get nothing. You get some cards out of their deck. So unless they happen to have another copy in their hand of whatever you surgicaled, and they don't have the ability to cast it, you just kind of played yourself. You just kind of competed on a value axis and lost. So surgical against Snapcaster decks is usually a trap, but in this case, that's not why we're bringing it in. We're bringing it in to keep them off of Tron permanently. Take lands out of their deck permanently. That's a good play. And the fact that we can kind of get queued against their Snapcaster Mages with this card, if it makes sense to do so, that is an upside. So I just want to make that clear why we're bringing that in. Nissa Vital Force, I don't know. Let's think about this one. She can grind getting a permanent back, I guess, if they counter something that could be relevant, or if they have some big Tron mana payoff, I don't even know what it could be. Maybe they do play Oblivion Stone here, I'm not sure. I don't know. We'll put her in the maybe category for now. Obstinate Bailoff is not where we want to be. Now, Choke. Choke is a very interesting one. This will feel very, very silly if we side it in and it's sitting in our hand while they just natural Tron us and they don't even look at blue mana. On the other hand, like we said at the end of last match, they are not a deck that goes tunnel vision on assembling Tron, not even close. Blue mana is almost always an important component piece of their progressions. Now, if we accept that as true, Fulminator Mage has historically been a fantastic play against any Tron variant. Obviously, Fulminator into immediate surgical is the dream, but even if this is just a Stone Rain effect, that is very, very good. Because again, we want to keep them not only off of assembling Tron, but off of hard casting things on curve. So if we consider Choke as another Fulminator style effect, where we can catch them with a blue land or two tapped and we can resolve this, and then that's kind of like Stone Raining them. Of course, they can still bounce the Choke, that's definitely still alive, but, as many ways as this can go wrong, I still think this is supposed to come in. You tell me if you think that is wrong. I am more than happy to hear it. I'm not certain about it, but spoiler alert, it does come up in game 2. So, anyway, I think Duress is fantastic here. It's going to hit everything we care about. Collective Brutality is a little bit more of a maybe. Hitting instants and sorceries is definitely relevant here. They definitely play some counter magic and they play Thirst for Knowledge, but the fact that it blanks on the permanents like Mindslaver is a little less appealing to me. That said, that's definitely still maybe. Wrath effects are not where we want to be. Kalitas is not where we want to be. So let's say we're going to bring in these 5, come hell or high water, those will be in our deck, and then we have 4 more for consideration. So what do we not like as much here? Well, even though they still give us some targets for Fatal Push, I still think it's quite bad. They're not going to give us any clean targets that I know of. Solemn Simulacrum still puts them up on cards, so does Snapcaster Mage, even if we push them. That's just not where we want to be. And as far as threats goes, it's a 2-2 and a 2-1 respectively. These are not cards we care about. Any of our threats takes care of them without blinking an eye. So Fatal Push can still come out. What else? I guess Liliana the Last Hope I'm on the fence about. She's generally pretty good in control matchups. This is kind of a hybrid control / big mana matchup. She can kill a Snapcaster cleanly, so I think she can stay in, but I'm a little bit on the fence. Abrupt Decay, I am going to bring out. It does have some targets, but I want my answers to be more broad. And especially on the draw, it's not like we're going to be able to catch an expedition map with this, which is probably its best use case scenario. So I'm comfortable shaving the decay. Now this puts us right at 60, and let's put this where it belongs here. So we still have 4 cards to consider. Spell bombs, yeah, I kind of like everything else that we have here. The one thing that I would consider doing is bringing out this Liliana for a spell bomb. Maybe should we even consider cutting another Brutality? I'm not sure. This is where it gets a little bit murky for me. So I really, really like this, and I also think this is just as good. Anything beyond that, I would need to think about a little bit more in depth. I would need to study some Tron stock lists, and I would need other people's input. So if you have any input to share, please feel free. Otherwise, running it back with something like this is looking pretty good to me. So let's go to game 2, see how it treats us. Alright everybody, we are back on the draw for game 2, and our hand is loose. It is loose as can be, while being functional. So it functions. Let's get that out of the way. It functions. It's got a manland, and it's got spells, and it's got enough lands to cast the spells. So it is functional, but we really want to see one of Assassin's Trophy, Fulminator Mage, or Field of Ruin to keep them off of Tron. We don't have that. We want to see some hand disruption. We don't have that. So this is a very, very loose hand. However, on the draw, it can do a little bit more work, potentially. We could find discard off the top. We could find any of the land destruction stuff. We do have a threat on turn 2. It's not the fastest clock, but as we've seen, they do play around with the graveyard a fair amount, so I do like Scavenging Ooze here. We're going to have more than enough mana to let the Ooze really control the graveyard too, if that's how the game plays out. And we have the Choke. Now, as I said in the sideboard, Choke is going to be a really high variance card, right? It's either going to do a ton of work or it's going to look a little bit bad. So, we're on the draw. If they have a nut draw, our mull to 6, we're going to be mulling to 6 if we mull this hand looking for something that can stop a nut draw, right? Because the lower we mull, the less likely we are to win the value game in the long run. So do we mull to 6 looking for something that can stop the nut draw, aka having a nut draw of our own, or do we keep the 7, trust in our top deck and see how it plays out, and still have the potential blowout of Choke? Now, I chose to keep. I am not confident that it's correct to keep, but when I'm playing games like this and when I'm thinking in terms of uploading to the channel, I kind of tend to err on the side of saying, let's keep a hand that could be edifying. Let's keep a hand that could be educational in terms of seeing whether Choke is good or not. So, I kept. We'll see if I get punished for the keep. Opponent leads on Urza's Mine, but has nothing else to do. Very happy to not see a map there. We draw another land, that's very bad, but we will play our Hissing Quagmire, pass the turn. It's interesting, because when you keep a land-heavy hand, you have, if nothing else, you've reduced the chance that you'll find more lands off the top, because you just already have some in your hand. But it doesn't always seem to go that you just draw more lands whenever you keep a land-heavy hand. It just is punishing you for loose play, I guess, right? So we draw yet another land. At least it's a decent one. It's not the Field of Ruin we want to see, but it's a decent one. That said, we really want to see action. So we're just running out the use, hope we don't walk into a counterspell, and we don't. Okay. Fair enough. So so far we're not really getting punished. But they have removal. Alright, so the ooze is going to bite the dust. Does not feel great, but so far we're just trading one for one, you know? I'm not really too upset by that. So they're going to play a Buried Ruin and pass. So that's yet another way they're looking to kind of get recursive value out of their own graveyard. We draw yet another land. We are just flooded. We're punished for keeping the land-heavy hand. At least it's a Field of Ruin, though. Like, I just want to remind you watching about the construction of this deck. So any deck can flood, right? Even 18 land decks can flood and do flood. We are on a 25 land deck, so of course, statistically, we will flood more often than most. However, our utility is off the charts. We now have a second man land. We have the land destruction, so I just want to really drive home how nice our land base is. It's pretty painless, and the amount of value we get off of it is completely insane. We kind of have built-in flood insurance just based on how useful our lands are. So I cannot sing the praises of that enough. That said, we're not going to get cute here. We're just going to slam this choke and make them have an answer. I was afraid that they did, but they do not. They are just going to get a threat in play and start trying to race us, which I think is a perfectly fine play on their part. They're continuing to make land drops. They can still get out of this choke, or they might still be able to assemble Tron, you know, and they're also clocking us so that if our plan was to just choke and disrupt and dirtle, they're kind of pressuring us to do something beyond that. We are drawing yet another land, starting to get a little bit ridiculous, but again, we only have ourselves to blame. So we're going to make a land drop. We're going to get the Field of Ruin because Tron is now a legitimate threat to our very existence. They could top deck the tower. I think if they had it, they would not have played this Buried Ruin, but they could top deck the tower. So for that reason, we are going to take action in their draw step. Draw step the power plant. They'll float mana, sure. Now, worth noting a nice little synergy between Field of Ruin and Choke. So Field of Ruin, of course, does not actually Stone Rain them because they get to replace it. But they have to replace it with an island, and the island is a one-time use only thing until they can take care of the Choke. So, nice little synergy there. They play Academy Runes. Okay, so they were not going to assemble Tron. They also don't have a target yet for the Academy Runes. However, they do make a nice value play. This is going to ramp them, even though they can't use the ramp quite yet, thanks again to the Choke. It's going to continue pressuring the board. It's going to be something that gets value when it dies, and it's going to be something they can potentially buy back with the Academy Runes. So this is just a card that's... I've always loved cards like this, you know? They're not overpowered, they're not I win cards, they're not just windmill slam, I don't have to think anymore because I won the game. They're just subtly powerful on multiple different axes. I love the design and the play of cards like this. They are just pretty cool. We draw a threat. We draw Scavenging Ooze. That's a fine one. It's not something that is going to end the game particularly fast, but we are still very happy to see it. Take the window to resolve another manland. And just not messing around. You know, I don't know what they could possibly be packing, but we're just gonna eat our other ooze in the main phase. Gain a life, get big enough so the Solemn can no longer trade with us. They'll get in for 3. Fair enough. The clock is still pretty decent, and then they're gonna pass. Alright, we draw Collective Brutality. Now, this is normally, right? Normally at this stage of the game, this would be a pretty medium draw. Collective Brutality is often something you want to fire off on turn 2. But the way this game is played out, this was actually one of the best possible draws we could find. So, Normally, against a deck like this, escalating is kind of risky because if they counter it, you just blew yourself out really hard. But again, the choke is keeping them off of blue mana, which means we are free and clear to go all in on this brutality. And now all of these, you want to talk about flood insurance. We already had enough value out of flooding with the cards we already had. Now this is going to let us convert all of these extra lands into really good value. And amazingly enough, against a blue Tron deck, against either of those archetypes on their own, like against both Tron and against a blue control deck, you wouldn't expect to really have all three modes be relevant. Like, you probably don't have a target for the -2/-2. And yeah, the drain life is kind of relevant for advancing your clock a bit, but they're probably not pressuring your life total that much, right? But the way this game is played out, all three modes are actually highly, highly relevant right now. So we're going to just go all in, hope they don't have anything super crazy. We are going to hedge against preserving our life total while also having the usefulness of the Catacombs still in hand in case we draw like a Tireless Tracker. So we hedge by pitching one of each, and we get to kill their evasive attacker. We get to look at their hand. Unfortunately, there's no take, and we get to train for 2. That was still a fantastic play. We know they have another island, so they're not totally choked off of blue, and Ugin and Wormcoil. So if they ever get Tron, we are in for a world of pain. Those are some scary cards in hand. That said, we are still in a much better position than we were before we drew that brutality. Now we're going to become the aggressor, and we are going to animate our Ape Village, send it in alongside the ooze. Opponent's going to take the clean block, get their death trigger. Seems fine. And we're going to play a Verdant Catacombs. Now this time we're not going to be foolish and try to attack their graveyard in our main phase. We're going to wait for them to make the first move if we can. And if they don't make the first move, we're just going to pass the turn, because even cracking this fetch land... we're going to allow them to pass the turn without taking an action, because even cracking this fetch land gives them a window to respond while we don't have any mana to activate the use. So they play their island. They're now representing counter magic. They have 2 unknowns in hand, and neither of us is going to make a move on the yard, so we'll pass. We draw Tasigur. Okay, I like seeing more threats at this stage of the game. First things first, just to avoid any potential repeats of last turn where we can't crack for fear of going shields down on the graveyard, we will main phase fetch. We're respecting our life total. We're just going to get another forest. Wanting as much green mana as possible for the ooze long term, and we're going to keep the clock rolling. Alright, so we're going to send him in. Opponent has no blockers, so we're quite happy for a couple of reasons to just go all in on the ooze here. Number one, even if they have a bounce effect, this is still fine. We're still kind of clearing some stuff out for the Academy runes, and we're still gaining life, and life has been relevant to at least a minor degree in this matchup. However, they do not have a bounce effect. We get to get in for 8. That was the other thing. The upside is that it is now, if they don't have an answer, a 2-turn clock. It also doesn't even stop us from being really efficient with the rest of our turn. We still get to deploy our Tasigur, and we still get to do it while cleaning out our graveyard entirely, just like we did in the first game, without losing value. We're not sad to delve away any of these cards. We don't want another brutality off of Tasigur if we end up milling him, using his mill ability, rather. We would rather take our chances with a blind mill. So, lets us very cleanly deploy the Tasigur. Our opponent might have something to say about it. Wow. Okay. I was expecting counter magic. They instead play Gifts Ungiven. Now, maybe I'm just ignorant of this archetype, but that is not a card I expected to see whatsoever. Pretty cool one. Gifts is always an interesting magic card. So, I'm sorry, I skipped through that a little bit. The opponent showed us a gifts pile of a Boro Palace in the Clouds, which of course is a blue source that does not get choked. They showed us a Snapcaster Mage, which can snap back right now only the Spatial Contortion, but between being able to kill the Treetop Village and being able to chump block something, that's a relevant card as well. They showed us Urza's Tower, which of course gets them onto Tron and frees up the Worm Coil, and the Ugin in their hand, and the Batterskull, which is a really nice value play that they can cast with their current lands once they play the next land drop, of course. That will just prolong the game a lot. So what I did is I took away... Let's see. Where are we? I haven't resolved the gifts pile yet, or have I? Okay. Power Plant. Boro and Snapcaster Mage. So it's showing that I left them the Batterskull and the Urza's Tower, which is definitely not what I did. I think, sorry for the confusion there. I think this is the replay function getting a little wonky, as it is known to do. It is not without bugs, let's just put it that way. Pretty sure I did the opposite of what it shows here. We took away the Batterskull and the Tower, leaving them the lesser value play of Snapcaster into Contortion, and leaving them the Aboro, which is nice for them, but certainly not as nice as just getting Tron and casting a Ugin, which would just basically end the game. So, sorry about that. That's a downfall of the replay functionality, as nice as it is to get back into the archives like this of what you played. Every now and then you run into some weird stuff like this. So, the opponent is still... they just scoop it up there. So, again, this Batterskull is in the graveyard, and this Urza's Tower is in the graveyard. So their hand is Snapcaster, Aboro, Wormcoil, Ugin, and one unknown. So let's assume that they didn't draw anything crazy for turn, which obviously they didn't because they scooped it up. So their line there would have been Aboro, and then they would have Snapcaster into Spatial Contortion as their play to kill the Treetop Village. So while that's decent, it really puts them at 2 life. They're dead to even a Hissing Quagmire next turn. Like, even if they're able to wipe my board somehow, they're still choked. They're still, I think the opponent could have stood to play it out another turn, but they were just about dead. Just about dead there. We also had Scavenging Ooze to mess with any further graveyard shenanigans they had. Oh, also, I'm sorry. Maybe the opponent just saw that I had the Ooze to blank their Spatial Contortion. Yep, so they're not even able to stay alive. Now that I talk that out, I see that even more clearly. So yeah, they're just dead on board. Oh, fair enough. The opponent saw that before I did. So anyway, good games. Blue Tron, like I said, it's kind of in this weird place where it's pretty clear what you do and do not do in terms of sideboarding against Green Tron. It's pretty clear what you do and do not do in terms of sideboarding against blue-based control decks, traditional ones that try to go long. It is less clear, perhaps, what you do against Blue Tron, but I think what we did ended up being okay, and Choke ended up being absolutely spectacular. So, for those of you with experience in the matchup, I'd love to know, was Choke just good there even though it's kind of bad in the matchup, or iffy in the matchup, or is this a card that we should be for sure bringing in if it's in our 75? Or from the Blue Tron perspective, I would also love to know your thoughts. So, thanks so much for checking out this match. It was a fun one to play. Always nice to get reps in against lesser-known archetypes. And I will see you for the next one.